class. So this week we're going to look at 3 tools. We're going to look at Tool 24, Tool 27, and Tool 28. In each class, we will focus on a different tool. So in today's class, Monday, March 23rd, we're going to focus on Tool 24. And I think of this tool as a tool that enables us to divide and conquer any writing assignment that comes against us. So what this is very simple. The principle is that professional writers do not use outlines, they use lists. And so they would make a list of what they want to do in an essay. But there's a catch to this. Don't sit down and make your list first. If you have a topic to write about, for your first draft of essay 5, for example, sit down and write it. Okay, this is how the procedure goes. So Roy Peter Clark calls this the reverse outline. It's outlining in reverse. So that means you start with your essay first. So you've got an idea, you know what you want to write, you've got some things you want to say, you've got a point, a reason for writing. Let all of that flow into drafting the essay first. And don't worry about how long, is it meeting a certain length? None of that, just get it out and draft your essay first. Get it down on paper and in words. The second step then is after you've made your first draft, and you can see we will do this next week, not this week, but when I return, when I give you feedback on your first draft of the 5th essay, that's the point at which we will be applying this tool to the 5th essay. So I don't want you to do this now, okay? Just get that 5th essay drafted and uploaded. But this is where we're going, and this is how the reverse outline works. So you draft your first essay, and then after you've drafted it, you reread it, and you create an outline from it. In other words, after you write an essay, can you outline what you've written? Is there a clear organizational pattern? Because if there isn't, then that means something needs to be clarified, something needs to be reorganized, something needs to be changed. And this is the most effective, most useful way for revising a paper for content that I know of. So go back and divide your essay into parts and label the parts. And then finally, you have a list of the parts. So from here to here, I wrote about this. From here to here, I wrote about this. Change that list into subheadings. And can you divide your essay into logical component parts, each part hanging together and having to do with a particular subheading? This is the acid test for content, for determining how well the major parts, the body of your essay is holding together. Here is an example. On your left, you have a list. This is what the writer of this essay, and she was writing an essay on living with an autistic sibling. And after she had drafted her essay, when she went back, these were the parts that she noticed when she divided it. Looking after him, how tough that is. My parents need to rest. I try to comfort him. When I think about my brother and his future, I feel sorry for him. He howls, it's very loud. He keeps on for a long time when he does it. There's some periods when he just has to fight and he breaks everything and he hits us and he hits very hard. So you can kind of see that in her first draft, you can see the movement of her essay. In some ways, it's not very well organized. I mean, she's starting out thinking about the responsibilities and the difficulties and just the stress and the fatigue that her parents experience taking care and coping with an autistic child. She steps in and tells about what she does in this scenario, how she tries to help her parents by comforting her brother and how she feels about her brother. And then she talks about some of the behaviors that are particularly fatiguing and stressful. And look at how her list, so after she writes down the list of this is what I did, what my paragraphs are about, then she creates her subheadings. So there's this sense of precocious responsibility. In other words, from the time she was very young, precocious means it's before its time. It's an untimely. It's happens before it should happen. So here is this from the very beginning. She's feeling with her younger brother, she's assuming a responsibility of a parental-like responsibility for her artistic sibling. So there she has this subheading. How, and notice, she's kind of switched now after she's drafted the essay and she's made her list. What she's seeing here is its effect on her. So her subheadings are reflecting that perspective now. Notice that sense of organization, that sense of purpose, that sense of that focus, sharpening of focus. What's the point of this essay? Well, it has to do with her. So she had this sense of precocious responsibility. Notice the second subheading, how she felt sorry for her brother, feeling sorry for the sibling with autism. And then notice how it affected her, being exposed to these frightening behaviors. And then finally, what happens when there's violence in the family and how to handle it. So she came up with 4 subheadings for her essay, and she's going to push what she's written, all right? Each paragraph she's already written will fit under one of these subheadings. And then when she revises it, her revision is going to be purposeful, intentional. It's going to be focused. And everything she revised, she's going to revise the transitions from section to section to keep that sense of continuity, that connectedness, that all of this has to do with how having an autistic brother or sister affects the sibling. So here's another example of a reverse outline. So here's the first paragraph from, this is from our book, from a feature article written by Gene Patterson. He was a vet, and they were celebrating, I think it was the 50th anniversary of D-Day, some such thing as that. And he wrote a feature article for the St. Petersburg Times. And his article began with this paragraph. I did not want to kill the 2 German officers when we met by mistake in the middle of the main street of Jerebrand. They somersaulted from their motorcycle when it rounded a corner directly ahead of my column of light armor. They scrambled to their feet, facing me 20 yards in front of the cannon and machine gun muzzles of my lead armored car, and stood momentarily still as deer. The front wheel of their flattened motorcycle spun on in silence. Notice how I just have to draw your attention to that one place. So he captures that image, that detail of that front wheel of the flattened motorcycle just spinning on in silence. The question there, notice the silence of the confrontation. Nobody is speaking anything, but volumes of speech, the air is full of meaning. It's vibrating, it's resonating with meaning. The front wheel spins and spins. It's like the continuity of life. So the front wheel of their motorcycle is spinning and spinning. Guys, how long do you think the lives of these 2 German soldiers are going to continue at this point? So now let's look at this process of list to subheadings. So if I were going to list what was in that article by Gene Patterson, I would list he killed 2 German soldiers on a motorbike, and that's what he begins with. And then he compares learning how to be a soldier, learning how to kill, with learning how to box. And then he goes and he gives us his backstory, his personal story of growing up in Georgia, and what was that was like, learning how to box. And then he moves on and he shares, he rejoins this story of the 2 German soldiers and shares some of his other most memorable experiences, these memories that will not die, that live on in him, of both killing men and seeing men that you care deeply for killed. And then he ends by just halting here and focusing, highlighting that these are the 2 things that he remembers about the war: killing men and seeing men killed. Now let's move over and let's look at the subheadings. How does what he writes, this very personal narrative, how what he writes, how these things, these different parts translate into an outline, a reverse outline. We'll reverse outlining his story. And these are the subheadings he came up with. A man of the 20th century. Lead with the heaviest punch. From the Georgia soil. Senseless dying. 2 certainties about war. So those are his subheadings, and those are the subheadings that he used then to revise his focus, his story, to make his point that the thing he learned about war and the thing he would want to pass on at this time of remembrance and anniversary, as that war means that people learn how to kill, and that changes who they are. A man of the 20th century. If there's one thing, if you were between the ages of 18 and 24, between the years of 1914 and the close of the 20th century in the year 2000, the one thing that was certain is that you learned how to kill, and you experienced the deaths of many, many other people, from World War I, the Spanish Civil War, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Persian Gulf War. So here in his subheadings, you can see, you can follow his thought, the progress of what he wants to do, and notice that the second place, you begin with your 2, right? 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. So the 2 is a man of the 20th century, and the 1 is 2 certainties about war. What does that man know? What has formed the 20th century man? He has learned how to kill, and he has learned what it means to see men die, to have people you love killed. So now, from that kind of heavy note, we're going to move to a lighter note, your portfolio exercises for class today. I've posted some musical excerpts. You need to listen to these musical excerpts, and you need to divide them. Where would you divide them? Each musical excerpt is chosen in there because there are some subsections. And then brainstorm a list of subheadings. So when you divide them, right, that's the listing aspect. You're saying, well, this part of this musical excerpt has these things in common. There's a shift here, and this has this in common. It's louder, there's more brass, whatever. And then it shifts again. And then this last part has these things in common and is different from the part that came before for these reasons. You don't have to make those lists of reasons. I'm not asking you to work that hard. But that's just how I want you to think, and divide the music up then into subsections, and then come up with a heading for each of those parts, those subsections. Then draft a very brief synopsis of the musical piece. What story do you hear this music telling? Follow your subheadings, and this is just one paragraph for each musical excerpt. You're just summarizing the story that the music is telling. What is the music about? So you're identifying its topic. It's about something, and what is it saying about that? And use your subheadings. So this is the first thing, this is the second thing, and this is the third thing. Follow your subheadings. Remember, stories can begin in medias res. What does that mean? It means that's what Gene Patterson did when he began his article with confronting those 2 German soldiers on that motorcycle in Jereban. And then he goes back. Notice he goes back in time and tells his personal biography, his details of growing up in Georgia and learning how to box. And he applies the principles of boxing to the principles of killing. So perhaps your music, perhaps as you listen to this music and you think about the different parts of it, perhaps the first part is reflective. Perhaps what the first part of that music is telling is something that actually happened after the middle part. So keep that in mind. This is entirely an imaginative exercise. So it's just to kind of get you thinking about subsections and subheadings and the power of subheadings. It's about training your ear. We'll riffing off of last week, tuning that ear and thinking about hearing, learning how to perceive through hearing, through our ears. So then write that brief paragraph for each of those musical excerpts. Upload those paragraphs to the current portfolio for this week. It will be marked March 23, 25, 27, and then I will also say current on it, so you know that's the portfolio you need to be uploading your work to for the week. And then there's a discussion forum for today's class, so just copy and paste your best paragraph to that discussion forum. No need to comment, nothing like that. It's just so we go back and look at each other's postings and just think, so that's what they heard when they listened to that music. Wow, is that way different from what I heard? Of course, feel free to comment and share on the discussion forum as you look at the stories that your classmates heard in the musical excerpts you listened to, and think about the differences in what you're hearing and what you're perceiving in the music. Do you think someone perhaps perceived more deeply or more accurately than you did? And then what did they hear that you overlooked, that you didn't hear? Those are just questions for you to reflect on and think about as we think about this tool of dividing and conquering, dividing our work into subparts and then using subheadings to identify the movement, what we are actually doing to let our outline, if there is one, surface in our writing. If that outline doesn't surface, if you cannot identify clear subsections to your writing, if you cannot come up with subheadings, clear subheadings for the subsections of your essay, then that's a sign that that you need to do that there's something that hasn't quite worked in your essay. Okay? If you have questions about these assignments or this lecture, please email me. God bless you guys.